In Tennessee, there are two bodies of law that enforce criminal prosecution. There's state prosecution and there's federal prosecution. Sometimes the federal government will arrest you for the same kind of crime that the state has. And sometimes if you commit a certain crime in the state of Tennessee, only the state will arrest you. If you're arrested in federal court, you will be taken immediately in front of a magistrate that will tell you what you're charged with. And unless it's a very minor type of offense, they will hold you without bond. You will be prosecuted by federal prosecutors, and sometimes the prosecution can take several months. Many of the cases I represent, people in federal court, are drug offenses. A drug offense can be prosecuted in state court or federal court. In federal court, drug offenses are very common, and also gun charges are very common. Those are some of the most typical charges in federal court. Once you're prosecuted in federal court, if you are convicted, you go through what they call a sentencing phase, and before you get there, you have to either be found guilty by a jury. You have a right to a jury in federal court, or you can enter a plea. In many cases, most cases, the vast majority of cases in federal court are settled by somebody pleading guilty. And the reason for that is that the federal system is set up that if you plead not guilty and you go to trial and you lose, you end up more time in jail than if you take the offer that the prosecutor is making towards you. So the system is pretty well set up to force you or coerce you or suggest to you that you should plead guilty instead of going to trial and fighting the charges. So that's the reason why most people end up entering a plea in federal court. Once you enter a plea, then your case will be reset so that the probation office can do a report to the judge about your case. And most of the things that the probation office will look at will be the crime and your history, your criminal history, and they will add up those types of points and judge you based on how many points you have. The more points you get in federal sentencing, the more time you spend in jail. That is pretty much controlled by the federal sentencing guidelines. There's a book that's renewed every year or so telling the probation office how many points to give you depending on what kind of crime you committed. There's page after page of points for certain amounts of drugs. And so the probation office puts together the points and and they compare that to your criminal history. And if you have prior convictions, being criminal history, they'll add that up too. And then they'll give it to the judge to tell the judge what they think the sentence should be. The judge does not have to follow those guidelines, but 9 times out of 10, the judge follows the probation report and sentences you within the guideline range, which is usually a range of months, anywhere from, it can go all the way up to life, from 6 months all the way up to life in prison, depending on the crime and how many criminal history points you have. And then the judge looks at that report, and you have an opportunity to tell the judge why you think you should get less time. And then the judge makes a decision, and he would sentence you. Now, sometimes people cooperate when they get arrested, and that means that they testify against other people or agree to tell the government everything they know in the hopes of giving the government some, what the government calls substantial cooperation, which usually means that you're testifying against somebody or willing to testify against somebody. And the more you testify or the more evidence you give the prosecutors and the FBI and the DEA and the ATF or any of the above, they will go to the prosecutor and say, well, he helped us. Why don't you recommend to the judge that he gets less time in jail? So that is a way of getting less time in jail, and some people do that. Some people don't. I don't particularly encourage that. I will not tell my client not to do it. I will represent my client in the best way I can, and I feel the best way I can represent my client is to tell them everything about their case and give them every option that's available, and then tell them what I think will happen depending on what option they choose. And if they want to cooperate, I'll try to help them cooperate, but if they want to fight it all the way to a jury trial, I'll certainly help them do that too. Fees in federal court are usually higher because of the amount of time and effort that's involved in the case. It's a lot more complicated, and it is also procedurally more intense. Now that's federal court.